Hello and welcome to the Jay Duke Show on Horse Network. Well, winter circuits are all done with and everyone had a great time and lots of success for so many horses and riders. And now we're gearing up for our spring session. And it's so great to have you joining us here on the Jay Duke Show on Horse Network. We have a very special guest today. The chef de keep of the U.S. team is coming on, Robert Ridland, and it's going to be a very interesting conversation with all sorts of stuff that everyone's going to want to hear. So I'm really excited about this one. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's show is brought to you by EquiShopper, and EquiShopper is a really cool site, and it's not just an e-commerce site, but it really is one of the coolest e-commerce sites you'll ever see. But it also has stories, editorials, shopping, and community. It's got every sort of product you'd want to get. Pretty much anything to do with horses you're going to find on EquiShopper. And very exciting news, they have just recently combined with Equitana to bring you the Equitana USA Marketplace, which is powered by EquiShopper, which is essentially one of the world's largest trade shows for equestrian products. And so now, thanks to this partnership with EquiShopper, Equitana is going to have a 365-day format for the trade show worldwide. So that's going to be a great thing for all North American clients to check out. So go to equishopper.com when you get a chance and support our wonderful sponsors. I'm going to bring on my special guest today. Robert Ridland rode for Team USA in the 1976 Olympics in Montreal, Canada. He's won the American Invitational in Tampa, Florida. That was a historic Grand Prix. We missed that one a lot. He won the Grand Prix of New York in Madison Square Gardens, which is was an epic event. And he's also won the Grand Prix of Switzerland in Lucerne, Switzerland. So he's had a great resume to his riding career. He's a member of multiple winning Nations Cup teams for America, including in Toronto and Calgary, Canada. He's a successful show manager. He's been a commentator for NBC in the Olympics. And now he is the U.S. chef de keep for a very successful American team. Robert, welcome to the Jay Duke Show.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you so much for joining us. And you are residing in California right now. You just finished up a successful run of shows, 4 weeks of shows, and now you're joining us here. And how are things in California right now?
Well, one of the things that we like down here is the weather's pretty good. It's in the low 70s and sunny, and I'm sure that's probably not the case where you are.
Well, it is.
We try to come up your way when the weather is a little bit better in the middle of the summer.
That's right. Yes. Yeah, it's not sunny, but I've been outside already this morning and stuff. It is a very nice day. So I want to talk to you about, you're so experienced with the team events and your role as chef de keep, but let's go back to how, that career really started for you. And let's go back to the 1976 Montreal Olympics. And of course, for Canadians, it's very well known with Michelle Vaillancourt winning the individual silver medal there. But what was it like for you? You had a 4th place finish as a team in Montreal, and just describe your Olympic experience.
Well, Jay, I really can't answer that without basically going earlier than that, because Montreal was my second Olympics. My first Olympics was in Munich when I was the reserve rider. And it sort of gets to and again, cut me off whenever you want, but I was fortunate enough, if you live long enough, you get to experience a lot of things, to really be part of two different worlds. The U.S. ET with Bert Denemeth at the helm. In the 1972 Olympics, that was really the end of one era, which led to the beginning of the other era. The next era that you just referred to. The 1972 Olympics, because I was on the team in 1970 as a 19-year-old, kid, and then I got to be on the coattails of one of our greatest riders of all time, Bill Steinkraus, who had won the gold medal back in the Mexico City Olympics. That was back when Canada really put their show jumping team with your legendary riders on the map with the team gold down in Mexico. Now, that was before my time. But with the USET, it was really the end of the amateur era. Billy and Frank, Neil Shapiro, and Kathy Kusner were that team in Munich, and just being there, feeling that team pressure had a big effect 4 years later when we got to Montreal. And Montreal was exactly the reverse. There were a bunch of us kids. We were all 20-year-olds with the exception of Frank Chapeau, who was our captain at the time. But Dennis Murphy, Michael Matt's buddy, and I, we were the kids on the block. So we were not expected to win a medal, and we came pretty damn close. We were a time fault away from the podium.
Wow, well that is a great, what an experience for you to have that, and the youngsters. And you talked about kind of one era, and then another era beginning. What was something that you could really point out that would be a big difference between, say, the 72 experience and the 76 Olympics? What was something as far as the atmosphere of the team or the preparation or the courses, or what really stood out as a big difference?
Well, certainly the sport was different. When you get to the courses, those courses were more mammoth. They were jumps didn't come down unless you shattered them. As you remember in Montreal, the individual was just an unbelievably tough course there. And prior to that, Olympic experiences were similar. Mexico City was historic with the number of faults. I mean, they were in some ways just survival tests. Probably in a bigger change was really the advent of professionalism into the sport. Truly, the Olympics were held under the archaic amateur rules as late as the early 70s, certainly in 72. In 74, the World Championships between those two Olympics was the first time we had a true registered professional on our team, and that's the legendary Rodney Jenkins. He was on the U.S. team in Hickstead for the World Championships. By the time it got to Montreal, we were the forerunners, basically. We were all professional riders on that team. And Michael Matz, that was his first Olympics. He rode for Fitzsticks, and I rode for the Canes at Winter Place Farm. Dennis Murphy rode for Jack Murphy down in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And Frank, of course, was a professional. And that was the advent of, you would almost say, the predecessor to the golden age of U.S. show jumping, which were the 80s. It was when we won the gold in L.A. We won most of the World Cup finals in that decade, and it led to an all-star professional cast of riders. So I would say Montreal was the beginning of the drastic change in the sport and the professionalism that we have today in the sport.
And we're going to get to the evolution of how, for the position you're in today as far as helping to pick the team for Tokyo coming up. So let's talk about 1976. How were those 4 riders who were chosen to ride in Montreal, how were you picked for the team?
There was a committee like there is today, but it basically was Bert Denemeth. He called the shots. He picked the team, and I will tell you from my perspective, it was kind of interesting. I was on a horse named Southside when the Grand Prix up in Toronto. One of my bigger ones was a class that we won up in Toronto, but he was almost a modern horse. He had so much quality. He was a thoroughbred, very, very careful, but he had a little bit of the flip side of that coin, and that's the lack of bravery. And Liverpool's and water jumps were a little bit of an issue. So that had to get solved, and the prior riders that were on Southside knew that. So basically, despite the fact that he had a pretty good record in 1975 going into it, Bert came to me and he said, I got to be honest, that horse, the next time that he sees a Liverpool and it doesn't work out, that's the end of your Olympic dreams. I can just tell you. It doesn't matter if it's in a schooling jumper class or whatever, but we have to be able to check that box. So I went to Florida that next year and just made sure that I wasn't overdoing it in jump offs, because if you really wanted to set yourself up for something like that, you'd take shots in jump offs. I didn't do that. The Olympic Games, of course, are based on clear rounds, not jump off times. And so I thought I had a pretty good Florida circuit back then. Again, as a side, the teams that I was on, and Kathy Kusner was on teams at those times, we tended to be a little bit rebellious in various things, and we were a thorn in Bert's side. He was always kidding us about things like that. So he happened to see us in a coffee shop the night before the Invitational, and he said, "You know what? I am having the happiest time of my life right now, because you two, I won't have to put up with you in Europe on the team." And I was a little taken back, and I said, "Well, why?" And she said, "Well, you haven't won any Grand Prix." I said, Bert, what are you talking about? You didn't tell me I had to win Grand Prix. You told me I had to have clean rounds and not, have issues at Waters and Liverpool. He said, nah, I should have told you that, but you need to win a Grand Prix. I said, well, there aren't a whole lot left, are there? So end of the story was that there were 2 clean, and that was, as you remember, the golden days of the American Invitational in Tampa Stadium, where the Buccaneers play and so forth. There were 2 clean that night, and it was me and Kathy. and Bert and Frank and Elizabeth, they did the presentation, and he says, "Just I cannot get rid of you guys." So that actually put me on the short list at that point in time. And then we went to Europe, and of course the same thing happened over there. And what really decided the whole thing was in Aachen, when there was no. You remember those double Liverpools? They still exist, not quite to the same degree that they did back then, but the Southside was perfectly fine with that. So that really was my story of how I got in the Olympics, and it was similar to Michael and Buddy's.
Right. Wow. And so let's talk about, and for our viewers, the evolution of the U.S. team as far as how it's been picked. So that's what the situation was in 1976. And then talk us through what happened in the 80s and 90s as far as the process for picking the American team.
Well, again, Bert was through the 70s, and then Frank and George were chef de keeps at various times between then and 8 years ago when I took over from George. The evolution went through purely objective situations, and we had the lawsuits, as we all remember, back in the early 90s, and that was a very uncomfortable time for everybody involved. And we're now back to obviously, it's a system that, because we have an objective sport, is based on a lot of objectivity. And right now, for the short list, 7 of the 10 riders are right after. They're there because of the objective parameters of ranking lists and so forth. So it's a mixture of both, as our sport should be, and many other teams do pretty much the same thing. But it's to segue. Sideways on the whole thing, it goes back to the evolution of the sport, which I find, I personally find it fascinating, just because of having the perspective of how the sport was done back then and how it is now. And again, so, I know I'm on a segue. You mind me just going off on a segue of the sport?
Well, I just want to explain, just for the viewers. So they recently released the list for the 10 potential riders to go to Tokyo. And how they picked them was 7 of those 10 were based on points, four on rider points, 3 on horse points. And then there were 3 subjective picks, and that's how they came up with the top 10. So which really makes a lot of sense as far as, because it does create a nice balance to being able for you and your committee to come up with essentially the 3 riders, plus 1 that will be competing in Tokyo. The U.S. did go through a period of time when everything was picked up objectively, and then that, and because of lawsuits and different situations like that happened with a few of the riders. And I think the issue with that was it really burned the horses and riders out on the trials, because they were trying, there were I remember one year for the U.S. team, there were 7 trials that they did. And I think your top 5 scores counted, and it was exhausting for the horses. So certainly how you've evolved today to the system now is very, very interesting. And how, who are you working with to help pick those 3+1 riders for Tokyo?
Well, it's a lot. We have our advisors. I have obviously the head of show jumping, Lizzie Chesson, and so forth. But you bring up a good point. During that era where we were on the objective system, it showed the flaws in the objective system. And I was the course designer for a lot of those Olympic trials. And in order to select the best team, you obviously have to set some really tough courses. And we ended up in situations of, at times, picking the best team that didn't have enough gas in the tank in what really counted. And that, to me, is one objective that we really hold dear, is that through this current selection process, we're peaking the riders that will end up going to Tokyo at the right time, not exhausting them through a selection process, some of which is obvious from the get-go. One of the worst times of our selection process that I was involved with was when I course designed several of the legs of the trials. It probably was the year you're talking about, including Devon. That night in Devon, under the lights, we lost Jem Twist and Greg Best in the flukiest of situations, a reflection of the lights and the Liverpools and so forth, and the horse was eliminated. And here was a medalist from the prior Olympics, one of the best horse rider combinations in the world, and we just eliminated him from contention to the Olympic Games. And that, I think, woke up a lot of people that objectivity is very important in our sport, because it's the basis of our sport. You jump a course of jumps and the lowest number wins. It's simple as that. But you can't carry that too far, and other sports don't carry it too far. You would never pick your Ryder Cup golf team based on one Sunday round at some golf tournament, and pick the team on that. Because you could lose, Tiger Woods in his heyday, in his prime, because one of his errant shots went into the water. Okay, so Tiger is no longer on our team. That was brilliant. Sports that have a lot of variables involved. Golf is one. Ours is one. Very different from 100 meters. 100 meters is the same distance in the Olympics as it is in the trials for the Olympics. So there's some justification to that, more so than ours.
Right, and that it makes it much more challenging for you, and of course you cannot replicate even the exact Olympic circumstances as far as the ring and the jumps used and the course and all of that. There is that variable, which is one of the things that makes equestrian. I want to use the word crapshoot, where really anyone can win on any given day in that sort of setting, because you don't have it where it is set up, say like a tennis court or a track where it's always the same circumstances and you can pretty much pick your top three on a consistent basis. So that definitely makes your job a lot more difficult, no question. Yeah. How do you feel like with your past experience as a U.S. team member, and now you're working, with so many veterans and then so many young and up and coming stars, as far as what you can provide for them, mentally, as far as mental preparation for team competition? And what do you think is one of the keys to American success today?
Oh, I don't know that I'm would be actively involved, because one of the beauties of our sport is that it's done. Each rider has their own individual teams from the get-go, including the aspect that you just brought into play, the mental preparation. I don't get involved with that because their records speak for themselves. That I've got more of the umbrella to the whole thing. I guess one of the things that I do bring into it is the openness and the opportunity that's there, because I felt it was very important 8 years ago when we started that our next generation of riders should always be featured as a major part of what our plan is, because we've seen in the past, in the history of the sport, you can learn so much from the history of the sport without reverting to the history of the sport. But I know the British team, many years ago, when they had their all-star team of the Whitakers and Nick and so forth, didn't prepare for the future, and they had a dry spell until they got the next crop, which luckily turned out to be, unfortunately for them, turned out to be their team for their home Olympics in London. But I think they learned from that, and we certainly learned from that, is that while we have all-star professional riders at the top of the game and have been for a long time, we can't just dwell on them. So I try to impart that to the riders, that there is opportunity there, and these riders, if they deserve it, and they survived the trial under fire, because now we're going to go to Europe for this year like we always have, assuming that things don't get shut down again, and there'll be a little bit of a trial by fire when it comes over there, so that the ones that are prepared that are picked for the championship, actually we have and they have confidence that extra pressure will not be a factor. And as you know, in the championships that we've had within the last few years, those younger riders, that next generation of riders, have been an integral part of those teams.
Yes, they have, and you've done a great job of balancing that out. And Let's talk about, you mentioned Europe and going over there to prepare for Tokyo 2021, which, is the current plan, and hopefully that will definitely happen for you. You kind of talked about before about trial by fire type of thing. And if you want to, definitely that saying, if you want to beat the best, you have to play with the best, and, and raise yourself to that level. So how do you feel that has helped the American team? Because you, for the past several years, have been sending teams over to Europe to compete on a regular basis. And how do you feel that's helped in your development?
Well, I think the results show for themselves. With the last World Championships, with the Rio Olympics, and before that, the World Championships in Normandy, we've had those riders I just mentioned. The trial by fire is when they go in their first Nations Cup in Europe, and it's a big deal Nations Cup. And now all of a sudden they're competing not against their fellow Americans, but these stars that they've looked up for, and they can't be shaken by that when they're in the warm-up areas. And I would say historically, that system has shown that these riders that end up making it, and let's just say they're two Nations Cups, if there was a situation where they would have two Nations Cup starts, invariably that second Nations Cup start is better than their first one, because they learned from that first one. So when they're done with those two, and these are not Nations Cups where we're ducking the competition. As you know, over the years, it's been the Aucklands and the Rotterdams and so forth that we've used as preparation. That's been invaluable for those riders' confidences, and the record speaks for itself.
Yeah, no, there's no question about that. And we're going to get more into that record very, very soon. We're just going to take a 30-second timeout to hear from our sponsor, and then on the other side, we'll have more with Robert Ridland.
Okay.
All right, welcome back to the Jay Duke Show on Horse Network with Chef d'Equipe of the United States team, Robert Ridland. And we're just recently talking about, developing the youth in America, but you also have such a great, list of veterans to choose from. It's truly a wealth of riding talent and horse talent, no question, that you have to choose from. So how do you balance that? When you're picking your teams? You just recently in Wellington, Florida, won a 4-star Nations Cup with a team of kids that, I don't know if they can even drink yet. They were so young, and they were just rode so beautifully and amazingly. So how do you go about balancing putting out the best team in there and today's success, along with creating future development and success down the road?
Well, again, I don't want to be repeating myself on this whole situation, but as in our sport, experience obviously is a big factor when it comes to pressure that you're going to feel on the ultimate stage. We're not a sport like tennis, where you can lose a point and still win the match. You can use a game and still lose the set. You can lose a set and still win the match. It's not that pressure doesn't apply, but we're exactly the opposite. I mean, this is a sport where for the Olympic Games, you are asked to spend 4 years basically preparing for your dream of a lifetime, which will last a matter of a few minutes, a few 90-second rounds. And we are one of the very few sports where mistakes are not forgiven. And this is beyond what we're looking at in Tokyo. In Tokyo, with no discard score, it's even worse. It's even more extreme. But even with a discard score, each rider's round, if you, let's say, knock the first fence down, all right, nothing you can do. The sport is not designed to do something at a higher degree of difficulty that will wipe out that score. That 4 faults is there no matter how the rest of the round goes. And riders know that. And that's huge, huge pressure, because let's just even say golf, that's a little bit similar to our sport. You have a bogey on the first round. Well, all you have to do is birdie the next hole and you're back even. You just do something a little bit better. Right. And most other sports, gymnastics, whatever, a higher degree of difficulty of your next flip that can make up for an early mistake. So And now we have a situation with no discard scores going into the Olympic Games, which, of course, as we all know, is a little bit controversial. I personally think it's exciting. I think I think we're going to attract some new viewers to the sport, because it truly then becomes a sport of lowest number wins. I mean, there's where it is like golf. I mean, we have a sport that's incredibly technical to do. We all know that. You know that as a rider. You know what it takes to accomplish, what you've had to accomplish over your career. But it's on the flip side, very easy to understand the scoring system. It's not like football. It's a little bit complicated. It's lowest number wins, sort of like golf. You compete the first round with 0 faults, and you compete the next one 0 faults. Well, now in the Olympic team event, it's literally going to be lowest number wins. Well, anybody on their couch can figure that out. Just don't knock very many jumps down and follow the numbers.
So let's review here again for our viewers who may be unfamiliar with the change this year in Tokyo. So in past Nations Cups and in all Nations Cups up until now, as far as I'm aware, there's always been 4 riders per team if you can put 4 out there, of course. Mm-hmm. And then you're allowed to use 1 drop score. Starting in Tokyo now, there's 3 riders per team and there are no drop scores. So that is a big change, and that has been met with a lot of criticism. Now, you are not one of the people criticizing that. You like the simplicity of it, and you think it could be for the viewership, and I see that. But there's been a lot of top world-class riders that have come out and said, well, that's not really fair to the horses, and that's that changes the sport, and that's not the way that it should be. So if you can elaborate a little bit on your opinion on why you think this was a good change for show jumping, on an international level and on a viewership level, which is really what it's all about.
Well, I can go into how I feel the sport has changed beyond just the answer to that question. To me, the simple answer to that question is that the biggest criticism is the best team overall might not win. Well, that's true. The best team on that afternoon will win. If there happens to be an unfortunate circumstance, or spooks at some umbrella or whatever, and all of a sudden that turns into an elimination. Well, and that could be the team that was well in the lead, could have been 2 or 3 rails ahead of time in the lead. Well, if you're on that team or you're the chef de keep of that team, you're going to say, well, that was the most unfair thing on earth. How could that happen? And well, that's just bad luck. We've had the U.S., as you know, has had many, many Olympic Games where we have the world record 4x100 meter team. All 4 runners on the team are world record holders. So we have the best team. And then one of those guys drops the baton, the handoff to the 4th, runner. And then people yell and scream, well, that's unfair. We didn't win. We had the best team. Well, if that's the way the sports were judged, then why even have the sport? I mean, there's no point having the Olympic Games if we're just going to go on paper. No, that's part of the suspense, and that's always been a part of the Olympics. So I see that as something that might be a little unfortunate for a few teams. It could be us, or it could be, maybe we benefit from the whole thing. But I do think that although we are used to the discard score and we deal with it all the time, that many of the observers, and not just the casual observers, are confused by it. Because truly, when we're in a championship, I mean, I always, have Lizzie Chesson right there with the scoreboard, and she's got best scenario, worst scenario, depending on which, rounds are going to be dropped. And that can affect the strategy going in. I mean, you certainly, when that last rider goes in, if you can win with a time fault, you better well inform your rider of that. So it's really crucial that you know all that. Well, that's a little bit complicated. And for the viewers, it's really complicated. So I actually think it's potentially a very exciting change to our sport. And we should always be looking to improving our sport. And that, of course, goes to the much bigger answer, which we're asked all the time. How do you feel the sport is today? And it's so easy, I think, for all of us that have been around a while to fall into the trap. Well, the good old days. When the good old days, it used to be whatever. They weren't the good old days. They weren't the bad old days either. But the sport is different. It's fundamentally different than it was, and for good and for bad. And I think there are some things that are unfortunate that we're missing. And there are other things that I think are huge improvements to our sport. I mean, I was even thinking about it, just prior to coming on the air, of the ability to be able to look back at how the World Championships themselves have evolved. My very first year, when I was 19 years old, I was the reserve rider on the team for the World Championships, and that was in Le Bon. Back in those days, the World Championships went 4 years later to the country of the winner. So 4 years after David Broom won the World Championships in Le Bon, the World Championships were at Hickstead. And that was the year, as I referred to earlier, where Rodney Jenkins was on our team. And so what happens in Hickstead? Well, Hartwig Stinken of the German team won there on that unbelievable mare Simona. And so 4 years later, the World Championships were in Aachen, the home country, the home show of the winner. And these were iconic show facilities that exist to this day. Le Bon exists to this day. Hickstead exists to this day. Aachen, of course, does as well. So who won in Aachen? Gerrit Vilken won. Well, then the rule was that no country would get it 2 World Championships in a row. So instead of going back to Aachen, it went to the home of the second place rider, who, of course, was Eddie Macken on the great horse Boomerang. So 4 years later, World Championships were in Dublin. And then once again, Germany won, so it went back to Aachen. And then, of course, we all know who won in Aachen. The U.S. won the team competition, and Gail won the individual. So, and I've always said that when 4 years later, the FEI, in their wisdom, went to this World Equestrian Games format, which I considered personally a disaster from the get-go. And to me, it was the most unfair thing ever when show jumping had this wonderful progression. We all know where the World Championship would have been in 1990. They would have been at Spruce Meadows, the home country of the previous winner. And I'm hoping that we will get a little bit more of that back when we go back to a little bit less of the World Equestrian Games format next year when we're in Denmark.
That's great information. And I did not know that about the venue changes and all that. That's a great story. How do you feel, on that? And we're talking about kind of the changes. So again, for those that are unfamiliar with the World Championships, it used to be on the final day to be the Final Four ride-off, which was such a unique event where each rider would ride all 4 horses. And now, of course, that's been changed, and it's been changed, essentially for horse safety and such. But how do you feel now that, obviously still being World Games champion is still, the ultimate, right up there with a gold medal, of course. But do you like that change? Do you think that was the right thing to do? Or, personally, I think having that Final Four write-off created such an experience and was such a unique experience for the viewers, for the riders, and it really was a great test. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with what you're saying, Jay. It was really fascinating to watch. I mean, I got to watch Aachen in '86 when Gail won that. I was a commentator for CBS and analyzed that in great detail. Was the dynamics of that, and the riders that would follow the rider before it had a big impact on the horses. Mm-hmm. I remember, once again, I'm going back into the dark ages, but in Le Bon, the World Championships, the Final Four in Le Bon, there was an Italian rider who was a win at all costs deal, and the course designer mistakenly put the water jump at the end of the course. And so I remember him. He was riding the best horse in the world at that time, Donald Rex, which was Alvin Schockenmiller's horse, and heading toward the water. It was all by itself. It wasn't a related distance. He goes to the stick and then goes to the stick through the finish line. And of course, everybody said, "Why did you do that?" Well, I was worried about the time allowed, he says. Well, Donald Rex, you could walk to the water jump and he would explode over it. Well, all he was trying to do was mess up the horse for the next rider. Mm-hmm. So, okay, they corrected that. They made sure the water jump had no part of the Final Four. And then we've seen some unbelievable Final Fours, including Normandy, the last time it was held. That was just exceptional. Those 4 riders that was a clinic in itself to see those top riders do what they did. And in that sense, it's a shame that we don't have that anymore. But the sport does evolve. And I think this is a result of how it's evolved. These horses, they don't jump the courses that have the same amount of scope and danger that they used to in the old days. But these horses are so much better. I mean, I think you and I could both agree. But boy, some of these horses would be really fun to have ridden in our day. They're all jumping like our superstars, the few superstars that we had back then. We've got 100 superstars when you watch these Grand Prix, and they're worth so much money. And what was happening, and I felt it even in our team, that some riders were a little bit hesitant to signing up for that contract, so to speak. I mean, I don't mean that literally, but signing up for the World Championships when they knew that if they did make that ultimate final day, that 3 other riders would be riding this horse that they've been with since maybe that horse was a 6-year-old, and it's not going to be good for the horse. I mean, it's not. They weren't feeling that it was going to hurt the horse or anything like that. But is that the right thing for the horse? And I think the answer is probably not. So yes, I think we missed, seeing that horsemanship of 4 riders in the same deal. It really isn't part of our sport. It was a little bit more of a sideshow because, of course, that final day, when the 4 are there, the jumps are much lower. It's not a very technical course. So is that really part of our sport? And if I look back to an opinion of Bill Steinhaus, who I always felt he was my mentor from the very, very beginning. I was fortunate to be able to just watch him ride, let alone ride the team bus with him to a Nations Cup. He always thought the World Championships with that Final 4 was a circus. He said that's not what our sport is about. It's a catch riding test. It's interesting, but it's a circus. What our sport is about is a combination and a trust between horse and rider, and that's what the Olympics and every other part of the sport proves, basically. So,
right.
I think it's ultimately, I think it's the right move.
Right, and that's a great point by Mr. Steinhaus, no question. A lot of wisdom when it comes to his experience, no question.
Yeah.
I have a question for you from one of the viewers, from Duncan McIntosh from California. And there's a couple questions here. So let's just really kind of pare it down here and get to the young horse part of it. How can the USET recognize the young horse pipeline and those who came up that way in horse producing nations? So what are your thoughts are on, as far as the American program, as far as developing? Obviously they're developing a lot of wonderful riders. There's no question about that. The bank is full of talent in America. But what about from the horse point of view, and what do you kind of play a role in shaping that as far as how young horses are developed and breeders are rewarded in the United States?
I don't play a very direct role in that. I'm certainly indirectly part of a lot, including on the horse management organization side of things. We have here, and so many of the organizers have made a bigger deal than we had 10, 15 years ago with the young horse divisions and so forth. And I think that's been helpful. Obviously, the more opportunities we give for the young horses, I'm just giving you a pretty general answer to the whole thing. Duncan, I think my feelings on that is that, yes, the more that we can set aside and carve out places in the horse shows and make them as affordable as we possibly can for these young horses, the better off we're going to be. I mean, anything we can do to help the breeders in the U.S. is a good thing. Obviously, a lot of our horses come from Europe, and they will continue to come from Europe for a long period of time, and we have to just combine all those different aspects.
Right. I've got 2 questions for you. I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. So let's go back a little bit to the Tokyo Olympics and the 3 riders and the no discard. So let's give you a theoretical scenario, and you're choosing between your number 3 person to be on the team. And it would be between a horse that maybe was a little bit like yours. Maybe it had potentially a water issue, like your horse that you were describing from before. Or if you knew one that was really a steady Eddie, was going to go out there, going to give you that 4 fault score. type of thing. You knew that, where the other one could give you the clear round, but potentially could kind of flame out. Does that make a difference to you as far as the fact now you don't have that discard stored? Do you maybe play it a little bit safer as the chef to keep picking the team?
Well, you're throwing in a whole lot of hypotheticals, and I think that if you ask the same question of the chef to keeps of the major countries that are in there, they would pretty much give you the same non-answer that I'm going to give you. and that is, we know where we're going. We're going to a championship, a hot weather championship, which is not unusual for Olympic Games. Almost all Olympic Games are held under relatively warm weather situations. Not Montreal for one, and Sydney wasn't because it was their winter down there, but typically that's, and we know Tokyo's weather. We were there a year before the originally scheduled Olympic Games. It's 92 degrees every day and 100% humidity. And yes, the events are going to be held at night, so that's helpful. The beating sun isn't going to be a factor. But I think any chef to keep would say, look, we've got to put all those factors into it. And I don't think that anybody's going to be making any determinations right off the bat, and some of those flexibilities are going to go into the whole situation. You have a no discard score situation. You have a situation that more countries are going to be in this Olympics than have before, and that was one of the compromises that the FEI and the IOC came up with. So we're going to have 20 flags in the Olympic Games. So what's really happening is it's a situation not that dissimilar from the Nations Cup final in Barcelona, where you have a lot of different levels of countries, from the slam dunks to the ones that just barely squeaked in. And you have to predict what the course design are going to do for that. Well, we know similar situations, and so you have to put all those hypotheticals in there. Clearly, this will not be an Olympics similar to some of the ones that I described that have been at times even brutal. And that's just the way the sport has gone. I mean, we know that. And those are all changes in the sport for the better. The carefulness, the technicality of the lines, and all those are a big factor in the sport and will be a big factor in the Olympic Games. So you have to put that all into the hopper and then come out with what's the best scenario. You talk about the steady Eddie four-fault situation versus the situation where you're either going to have a clear or an 8, let's just say. Well, I don't have the answer to that, and I don't think any of the because you have to predict. Will four faults be good enough to win? In past Olympics, if they said, okay, we're going to give you 4 faults after the 2 rounds of the Olympics, you take it or leave it. Well, you'd take it. Now, I don't know that you would. I don't. So I don't have the answer for you. But the question is the question that we'll all be going through as the time gets closer.
Absolutely. So
4 faults might not win you. I mean, might not win you a squat when it comes down to that. And we even saw that a little bit in Rio, the last Olympic Games. Mm-hmm. There were teams on 0. There were more teams on 0 than there were podium spots after that first round. The second round was tougher down there. So, but that was an Olympic Games that had fewer teams. So those are very legitimate questions, and that's my non-answer.
Yeah, well, it's a tough spot for you for sure. I do love on the show. I do love to ask riders often, who is the one competitor that you fear the most? Like if it was just say a 2-horse jump off, and who is the one person that would strike the most fear in you? So I'm going to ask this in a little different way to you as the chef of the U.S. team. Who is out there the one country that, I think whenever the U.S. goes up against competition, they're always one of the favorites, regardless of where it is. But who's the country out there that concerns you the most that could take away that gold medal, from the American team in Nations Cup competition?
Okay, well, I warned you ahead of time. I'm going to give you a bunch of non-answers, and I'm going to do that again. And that's just because of karma. Because whatever team I would say, and do have an answer to that, but you're not going to get it.
Love it.
That would be yeah. It's all the other teams would then the bad karma would come back. I think that most would answer that question is that there is one heck of a group. I mean, when it goes from 20 teams in the first day to 10, which is similar to what happens in Barcelona, there will undoubtedly be a couple teams that on paper should be in the 10 that will end up just because of an accidental or unusual rail down or whatever, going to end up 11th. And we've ironically been in that spot in Barcelona a couple times because it comes down to that. There are so many countries that have very strong 3-rider teams because that also increases the number of really good teams. The fact that 3 is easier to find than 4, and that used to be an advantage that we were one of the countries that was helped by it, is that we have so many top riders that we could field stronger 4-rider teams than most countries. But there were a lot of countries that had strong 3-rider teams, but when it comes down to that with the discard score and so forth, that all 3 of those riders have to be on their day. But what I'm saying is that there are going to be more. I think the ones that won't make there'll be a few that won't make the second round that will probably be fairly predictable. But there's going to be some that are not at all predictable. So I just I don't want to inflict bad luck on us by mentioning which team.
Absolutely. Well, I don't want to inflict any bad luck. In fact, I want everyone that comes on this show to make sure to win everything that they go in. No question about that.
There you go.
We have
I'm all forward with that. Okay, so don't put on if that's your theory right now is don't put on any of the other chef de keeps.
That's right. Exactly.
until after the Olympic Games.
Well, many of your the winning team in West Palm Beach recently, they've been on the show already. So I think the karma is there for the Jay Duke show as a guest, no question about it. And I sincerely hope that continues for Team USA. Robert, thank you so much for being on the show. You've been a great guest, so many great stories and great information, and I really appreciate the time. Next week on the show,
Jay, I just want to say I had a lot of fun. That was fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Next week, we have a very interesting show. The president of Equestrian Canada is coming on, Chris Sorensen, who's also an international Grand Prix rider. And similar to what's happened in the United States and with USEF, there's a lot of people in Canada that are not thrilled with their national governing body. And there's a lot of questions about what's going to happen in the future with that. It's a very hot topic. For all the viewers, if you have any questions, please send them into Horse Network or please send them into me, and we're going to try to get as many viewer questions up as we can for this episode because it's a very interactive episode with Chris Sorensen, and we hope to get all of your questions answered and hope to make the sport better for everyone in 2021. Thanks so much to EquiShopper. Check them out, a great e-commerce site. Thank them so much for sponsoring the Jay Duke Show. I really, really appreciate it. And it's really everything that you could ever need. You're going to find at equishopper.com. It is your destination for every equestrian out there. Thank you to my producer, Carly Sparks. She did a wonderful job as always. And next week, we'll see you on the Jay Duke Show. Please remember, ride safely and always respect the horse.